You're listening to Interactive Wrestling Radio, featuring the Interactive Interview, courtesy of WrestlingEpicenter.com.
And welcome back to another edition of Interactive Wrestling Radio, and joining me on the line for the first time in a long while is a gentleman who was the longest reigning co-host, I think, in the history of this show. He is Mr. Patrick Kelley. Are you with me, sir?
I am here, James. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you back on, man. It's been so wild. It's weird introducing it kind of like an interview, but that, in a way, is what we're going to do here, because Patrick, in addition to being a new father, if you don't mind me saying so on the air.
No, go for it.
Yeah, Patrick's a daddy.
Becoming a new father is my greatest accomplishment in the last few years. I can definitely say that.
It's probably in your whole life, man. I've been there, and I know how that feels. It's an amazing thing to go through. And then, of course, Patrick's also a new author. In addition to loving professional wrestling, and this is something I've known about Patrick for a long time, he loves a lot of different things in pop culture, but perhaps nothing more than Godzilla. And Patrick has written not one, but two books, it looks like, about the subject of Godzilla. The book is available now through Amazon.com. It's called The Monster Fight Record. Is that about right?
That is right. It is available for pre-order. The Kindle edition is available for pre-order on Amazon. Paperback and hardcover will be available on August 27th. So that's when you'll be able to get those.
All right. So let's get right to it. What about the Godzilla? What about that whole franchise kind of appealed to you? And how long have you been harboring these emotions about the greatness of Godzilla?
Well, I talk about it a little bit in the book. The introduction to Volume 1 really talks about my history with this film series and this character that I've been following for most of my life. I got into it when I was about 3 or 4 years old, and I've been virtually a lifelong fan ever since. And, as a young child, I was always drawn to the older monster movies, like the ones that my parents and even grandparents grew up with, like the Draculas, the Frankensteins, the King Kongs. So I was always fascinated with those older monster movies. And I think a large part of that is because my mother was fairly strict in terms of what I could watch, especially at that age. Mm-hmm. So I wasn't going to be watching Chucky or Freddy Krueger or Jason Voorhees or anything like that, at least not at that age.
Right.
But I was allowed to watch all these older ones. So those are the ones that I kind of dove into, and that's where I got my horror and monster movie fix, because I've always been fascinated by larger-than-life creatures and monsters and all sorts of things that can't exist in the real world. And, naturally, he's the king of the monsters. And by the time I was born, there were already 16 movies, like 16, starring this one character, this one monster. So I saw the first Godzilla movie I saw was the original King Kong versus Godzilla from 1962. And my entire life since then has basically been a giant scavenger hunt to find and watch all of the Godzilla movies. And I guess maybe this book is a continuation of that search, because it's all about determining Godzilla's win-loss record and determining a system for figuring that out, including those old fun percentage equations that we used in grade school math and all that other fun stuff. And it's been a wild ride. And I also think the creation of this book came about because the COVID lockdowns nearly drove me insane. And I was looking for something to do, because at the time I wasn't married yet. I wasn't a father yet. I was living on my own as a bachelor, and I couldn't go anywhere, couldn't do anything, couldn't go anywhere. Mm-hmm. So I had all this pent up energy, and I'm a naturally introverted guy. So, it's the old saying, there is such a thing as too much of a good thing. I couldn't stand being cooped up inside anymore and doing nothing. So I put a lot of my energy into this writing project that has been, at this point, over 3 years in the making. And a lot has happened to me in that time, gotten married, become a father, all that other fun stuff. But this project has been a long time coming, and I'm glad that we're finally at the end.
Absolutely. And it comes out, again, you said it's available on Amazon.com. And if you are looking for it on there, you want to search Godzilla, The Monster Fight Record. And I got to tell you, like you, I have obsessions. I have things that If you ask me about it, I could tell you episodes, not Star Trek, like most people, but if you gave me like the episode of Cheers or the episode of this, that, and the other, I could tell you all about it and the side characters and all this other stuff. But this is definitely something that I've known that you've had in you for a long time, so I'm glad you're getting it done. My oldest is a little bit of a Godzilla fan, I would say. I would call him maybe a little obsessed with it. He buys a lot of the toys when we go to like the toy fairs, and he said he wants to read your book, but he says he'll be angry if Shin Godzilla does not rank high.
Oh, well, here's the thing: Shin Godzilla, which I want to make this clear right now. Shin Godzilla is one of my favorites.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the best Godzilla movie of the modern era. Definitely since the turn of the century. I think it's a great one. The problem is he doesn't have a fight record because he never fights a monster in the course of that film. So as of right now, Shin Godzilla has no fight record. So unfortunately, the record kind of reflects that.
So he's both undefeated, but he also has no wins.
Yeah, exactly. He's just kind of a blank slate right now. One day I hope that Toho Studios will make a sequel to Shin Godzilla, which they haven't done yet, and the next movie that they're making looks like it will not be a sequel to it. But here's hoping that one day we get it.
That sounds awesome. Now, what does your fandom look like? I know you said you collect all the movies, but what about like toys and posters and all these other things? Do you have any like specific piece of merchandise that's Godzilla themed that is like anybody that's into Godzilla will go, oh my God, I got to get me one of them?
Here's the thing, and I do talk about this a little bit in Volume 1 about my early fandom. Finding Godzilla memorabilia was very difficult when I was young because Godzilla's a foreign pop culture icon. He's a Japanese figure, and you and I grew up at around the same time period when the same things were hot. Like, there were times where you could walk into any store and you could find anything related to Batman or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or Power Rangers or anything like that. They were everywhere. Not so much with Godzilla. That was something that was an obsession I had where I had to fight a little harder to find certain things. And actually, as far as memorabilia goes, I wish I had held on to my Trendmasters Godzilla action figures because when those came out, I was over the moon. Like, that was one of my best birthdays where I got nothing but Godzilla Trendmasters figures because it was I couldn't believe it. Like, oh my God, there's actually a Godzilla toy line that I can collect. But I wish I'd held on to those. But honestly, my biggest pieces of memorabilia that I'm really fond of are some of the books, some of the Godzilla-related books. One of them being Jeff Rovin's The Encyclopedia of Monsters, which is not specifically a Godzilla book, but Godzilla is definitely in it. It basically goes through literature, books, TV shows, movies, all sorts of things, and basically just gives descriptions of all the monsters in fiction. And it's really like a great comprehensive collection of information on all the great monsters that have ever existed. Now it's like books like that are kind of obsolete now because I think Google kind of, Google and Wikipedia kind of renders such a thing obsolete. But, having that thing, I think it came out in 1989, 1990. And when I got a hold of it, it became one of my prized possessions. And there's a few other Godzilla books out there. One that sticks out to me is, and it's a more recent one, but the biography on Ishiro Honda, written by Steve Reifel and Ed Godziszewski. I hope I didn't butcher that. I'm sorry. They're two of the OGs when it comes to Godzilla authors. And they wrote a biography about the original Godzilla director, Ishiro Honda. He directed the original Godzilla film and several of the sequels during the classic era, the Showa period, the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And it's really great that, as Godzilla becomes more and more of a legendary figure, people have kind of gone back and reevaluated those old movies. And at the time, we kind of saw them as like these cheap, kind of like, oh, it's just cheap, silly stuff for kids with hokey special effects and everything. But Honda's work has kind of become reevaluated, especially since these movies are now becoming available, are now more available in their original Japanese language. So some of that hokiness kind of goes away when you watch it subtitled instead of with a less than stellar dub, which I've argued that dubbing has its own charms. But
yes.
Yeah, but I think people are now going back and reevaluating it. They realize, oh wow, Ishiro Honda, he's actually like a really good director. And one of the biggest indicators of that is that this book that I'm talking about has a foreword written by Martin Scorsese, of all people. This is a guy who made Goodfellas and Casino and The Departed and Raging Bull and all these other classic movies. And here he is, like, paying tribute to Ishiro Honda, who, you know, in the eyes of film historians up until recently was seen as kind of like this hack science fiction director. And it's not true. He was actually the Godzilla movies that he made were of a higher quality and are highly regarded. It's nice to see that perception of him is changing. And Godzilla as a whole, that perception has changed, which is also great to see.
So I watch The Simpsons, and I think of the comic book guy, and basically anything that's new or not the original run or the first thing of anything, it's garbage, I hate it, and things like that. You know, he just gets a very arrogant attitude about it. Do you kind of feel that you have a little bit of that when you see the remake of Godzilla versus Kong and things like that coming out?
No, I don't. I actually quite like a lot of the new stuff that comes out. It depends. Not everything is stellar. I wasn't the biggest fan of the anime trilogy, which came out on Netflix. That was not one of the better entries. But like I said, Shin Godzilla was very good. And the MonsterVerse stuff from Legendary Pictures, I think, has been very entertaining. There was the 2014 film, Godzilla King of the Monsters, and the new Godzilla vs. Kong, all of which I thought were entertaining for different reasons and in different ways. Now, I have major problems with other reboots of other properties that have come out. We don't have to get into that right now. He-Man and the Masters of the Universe on Netflix was garbage, but with Godzilla, I think for the most part, he's been pretty well protected and typically does pretty well.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, again, the book is out there right now on Amazon.com. And do you want to talk a little bit about wrestling before we circle back to the book and close out?
Sure, let's do that. There's a lot going on in professional wrestling, especially with All In coming out and LA Knight basically conquering WWE. So what do you want to talk about in the world of pro wrestling?
Yeah, let's start with the battle that I thought was over, but it's kind of come back into the circle again here, and that is, where do you stand on the great divide of AEW between the Elite and CM Punk?
Oh man, it's hard to say because Punk is probably ideologically the one I align with more in terms of how wrestling should be presented and the psychology of professional wrestling. I would probably align myself more with him. Mm-hmm. And if you look at Collision and Dynamite, to me, I mean, Collision is a significantly better show. I think so. It's on a worse night, and it's the third show of the week, so it kind of gets buried under, you know, a lot of different things that keeps it from being what it should be. Now, my question is, why can't Collision just be Dynamite? I don't understand why we need to have two different shows that are stylistically different from each other. I don't understand that at all. And,
I can answer that if you like.
Oh, sure, go for it.
All right, so the biggest, and it's funny because you know me long enough to know that when I was on AM radio, the station director hated, absolutely despised that I always took what was going on in wrestling then to WCW and said, well, this is where WCW made their mistake and they're making the same mistake. Well, It's a lot of that you could see right now with AEW, and I'm not going the direction people think I am. I'm not saying Nitro and Thunder, because those were basically the same show. You know, they're just a continuation. These are very different views. But the problem remains the same, and that is that the guy in charge isn't exuding authority. So what you have is, you have the guys who want to put on a wrestling show reminiscent of basically everything we've seen wrestling be during its glory days, from the Attitude Era, maybe even a little bit of rock and wrestling, because you can't tell me those intros to Collision aren't Saturday Night's Main Event inspired.
Absolutely.
You got that going on there. And then you watch Dynamite, and I would say that since Collision started, Dynamite's kind of been left to its own devices, and it has become virtually unwatchable. I used to watch the whole show in maybe an hour and 40 minutes and with speed search and getting out of the commercials. Because, again, I'm in Arizona, so we get it at 5 o'clock. I'm not ready to watch it then. I'm ready, maybe 6:30. I can turn it on and fast forward through the DVR. Yeah, no, but I'm getting through it now in 30, 45 minutes. You got Moxley coming on there and bleeding for no reason, and they're even making fun of it with the announcer saying, "Well, it's a day that ends in Y, so that's why he's bleeding." And then you got the Young Bucks, who are not what they once were in terms of the eyes of the audience. They're not popping, "Oh my God, it's the Young Bucks" anymore. They're kind of just, I hate to say old hat, and we've seen their act. And Orange Cassidy, the Groundhog Day that his performance is, there is so much repeat material on there that does not appeal to me and my likes of wrestling. That, yes, I like Collision. So basically, what I started to say, though, what I was starting to say at the beginning is Tony Khan's not in charge. So you got, on one side, you have a show I don't like with people that I probably would agree with politically in the Young Bucks and that on Dynamite. But I don't like the show and I don't like their view of wrestling. And then you have somebody that I guarantee you we'd come to blows if we talk politics. But if we talk nothing but wrestling, I completely agree with them. And that's Collision. And I don't know how close you're following the news, but he took shots at Hangman Page after last week's Collision. The live crowd, recorded on their cell phones. And that became a big deal. And now you can't tell me that him doing that, which was, by the way, bad on Punk. He should not have done that. I'm not a sycophant for the guy. But he did that, and now you got Dave Meltzer putting up his podcast, and the cover art is a picture of CM Punk, and it says AEW has to move on from CM Punk. You can't tell me the Young Bucks didn't tell him to do that. So where's the right party? The right party is the guy in charge should be getting them in freaking line.
And that's kind of where I was going. Ideologically, as far as wrestling goes, I'd be with Punk, 99 times out of 100. And I don't know all the backstage dealings. I've had my own theories about the Bucks and why Cody left AEW. Mm-hmm. I don't know for sure. I haven't heard anything. We still don't know why Cody left. WWE did a whole documentary about Cody, and when they came onto the subject of why he left AEW, he pretty much just said it was a personal issue. We'll leave it at that. So there was some kind of falling out there that led to that. And I don't know if the Bucks had anything to do with it, but I've seen like kind of a pattern with them, I think, where they rub some people the wrong way. And Punk is not the kind of guy you want to rub the wrong way because he's an abrasive, blankety blank. And he doesn't know how to keep his mouth shut. I just look at him and it's like, Punk, what do you, like, when I heard about what he did to Hangman or what he said about Hangman, I was like, dude, what are you doing? Like, you know what's going to happen when you say something like that. Why can't you just watch your mouth?
Yeah, he says that, and then, of course, it's going to get back to Hangman, so there's going to be bad feelings there. And you have it's so weird, and I hate to tie everything back to politics, but it's so weird that the guy who is all about these LGBTQ issues and all about the actor strike, very much left-wing leaning, is CM Punk, yet he's getting the Trump treatment, where he has a ready and willing wrestling media being stirred up by right-wingers who have wives that were at the January 6th, whatever you want to call it, protests. I'm going to call it a protest. The Young Bucks' wives were there, so was Jericho's wife there, but they're stirring up a wrestling media that's all too willing to completely eviscerate this guy. He's very much, in a lot of ways, Punk is very much the Trump.
Wrestling?
Yeah, and he'd probably hate being called that, but it's absolutely true.
Oh, hi, irony. What a cruel mistress. But yeah, and it's just one of those weird things where, and I completely agree with you on the point that Tony Khan does not give off the air of someone who is in charge. And I was having this conversation with somebody online not too long ago. And, you have Vince McMahon, who everybody says is a jerk. He's again, a blankety blank, and everything else you could possibly imagine. But at the end of the day, what Vince says goes.
Right.
And that's it. End of story. And that's you kind of need that. And I don't get that sense from Tony Khan at all, where it's just kind of this madhouse where they had to create a second show just to appease everybody. And that's insanity to me.
It is insanity. And the thing is, this new rift where people are now, oh, Punk's such a cancer. If you go back a week to 2 weeks, somewhere in the next 7 to 10 days, go back in that frame, the exact same things they're saying about Punk to this week and today are the things they were saying about Britt Baker and the women's division then. And it's the same issue with the women. You have a clique that is in charge. They don't like certain ones. You have a guy in charge of the women's division, which explains the champion, which I don't know a single person that's, in favor of this person holding the world title right now. Even if you're okay with her being on the show, I don't see how she's been presented as the one who should be going into the biggest show in company history. They're saying in wrestling history.
I can tell you what happened there.
Okay.
It was two things. Well, I mean, there's a lot of problems with the women's division, but there were two issues that kind of presented itself. One, I believe it was supposed to be Jamie Hayter versus Toni Storm in London, which would have made sense given, their backgrounds and who they are. But Jamie got hurt. So this is kind of like a plan B. And, I'm just thinking about it. There's three things. Then two, they had the 200th Dynamite. Well, we got to have a title change on the big show. And that was I guess they felt like that was the only title that could change hands because their plan for the stadium show got nuked. So it's all right, let's just change the title. And three, there was that, kind of thing going on Twitter or X or whatever it's called now, where it's like, oh, AEW needs to treat the women's division better because, women deserve their place in wrestling and everything. I don't necessarily disagree with that, but if you're given a spot, you have to deliver. And thus far, for the most part, the AEW women's division has not delivered. I'm sorry. They're consistently the weakest part of the show. And that hasn't always been the case. They've had their bright spots, but right now they are I've heard that they're the lowest rated segments on the show, and I believe it because they're the least interesting parts. Even on Collision, which I think is the better show, they're the least interesting part of the show. It just is. I'd rather watch Ricky Starks, FTR, CM Punk,
Powerhouse Hobbs.
And those guys.
Yeah, he's
Powerhouse Hobbs. I'd rather watch Wardlow. Where's he? I don't know. There's the guy they dropped the ball with. I think he's.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say they didn't just drop the ball with him; they killed him. I don't know if they can get him back. If they can build him.
They can't. They've killed him beyond repair, I think. But
yeah. Because thinking back to last summer, the beginning of last summer when he beat MJF and they carried MJF off in a stretcher, Wardlow was stoked and ready to go. He could have been their version of Goldberg. Exactly right. Yeah, Goldberg. And that's just not what happened. They didn't do a good job with him as TNT champion. But when they had him lose to Joe by submission, then stand up like he was going to kill Joe, get kicked in the balls while staring eye to eye with him, get choked out again, and then have his hair cut. Jim Cornette likes to say, well, why don't you just piss in his mouth while he's down there? I think that's fair. I think it's a fair statement. What else could they have done to the guy to make it seem like, hey, this guy is certainly not a cyborg? The Sting, a lot of people forget this. In WCW, there was a music video they ran for Sting when they were trying to kiss up when he was starting to become the Crow. And they used Bonnie Tyler's Hero. He's got to be fast, he's got to be strong, and he's got to be fresh from the fight. Well, Wardlow was none of those things. He was dead on his ass, he got his hair cut, he was choked out twice. I mean, you can't be somebody's hero if you're basically a chump. And people don't forget. They saw him be a chump, and that was the end of Goldberg. That was the end of Wardlow.
And that's one of those things, and this is an interesting part of wrestling psychology and handling baby faces. And I'm getting way off topic here, but it's fascinating to me anyway, so I don't care. When you look at Ultimate Warrior's title reign and you compare it to Hogan's, Warrior didn't work as well because by the time Warrior got the strap, Savage beat everybody, Hogan beat everybody, Warrior beat everybody. So by the time Warrior got the belt, there was nobody left for him to face. And he didn't have that rival to really help elevate him or help make him into that strong babyface that he could and probably should have been. When you have a character that's that powerful, it's hard to kind of get heat on him without killing the mystique. That's always a weird balancing act. And they didn't achieve it until the next year after he'd already lost the belt when he did his feud with Undertaker, which was arguably the best program Warrior had during his time in the WWF, outside of the WrestleMania stuff with Hogan and Savage. But as far as a house show loop and a feud where Warrior had to be kind of the main star to kind of carry everything because Undertaker was a newcomer at that point. That was probably the best thing that Warrior ever did. And it's like, man, if he had had Undertaker when he was champion, we probably would be thinking a lot more favorably on him as a world champion. But Wardlow, it's like, it almost feels like they didn't want to make him invincible. It's almost like what WWE does to a lot of guys. I watched them do it to The Fiend, Bray Wyatt.
Mm-hmm.
They had this unkillable Undertaker 2.0, and they just demolished him and just ruined him.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand. But in Wardlow's case, they probably thought, well, we can't make him invincible because then he can't get sympathy. But then they went too far, and now he just looks like a loser. So they completely upset the balancing act that they need to achieve.
Yeah, and you got to wonder how many people were in Tony's ear to make that happen, because they kind of, our old pal, and I'm sure he'll be listening, Eric Clancy, used to say, "Oh, I got lightning in a bottle. Let me open the lid and let it out to play with it for a while." That's kind of what they had with Goldberg. They did that. Hi, Eric. Damian Priest actually said the same thing to me once when I'd interviewed him when he was still Punishment Martinez. The Ultimate Warrior and Undertaker feud when he was in the casket was what he first saw in wrestling, and he said that was it. I was so intrigued by that I became a wrestling fan because of that. And there you go. Look where he is now. So
yeah, Mr. Money in the Bank looks like he might win the belt.
I would love that.
The secondary belt, that weird, like, Roman can't lose, so we have to create another belt as a consolation prize. He might get that one.
Yeah, that might happen. That would be very interesting.
Yeah.
But remember, he is 2 months older, or 2 months older. Yeah, 2 months older than L.A. Knight, Eli Drake as he was. But they thought L.A. Knight was too old. That's really interesting to me.
That's so weird. And what it is with him, and I'm glad to see LA Knight doing as well as he is, because you and I were both fans of his during his Impact days.
Yeah.
Eli Drake, Dummy, all that stuff. I was like, this guy's golden. And I even said back then, it's like, this guy could make it in WWE because he has a personality and a character that could connect with the audience. And people want to throw ring work and star ratings around. I'm like, dude, that stuff doesn't matter. You have to connect with the audience. And that's what he does very, very well. And I'm glad to see him, getting over and doing as well as he is in WWE. That said, I think one of the reasons they're hesitant to push him is because he wasn't in the plan. And I think WWE is this weird, they're just weird creatively, where they're like, if you don't fit into their plan, they're not very good at pivoting and changing the plan.
That's the word, pivot. Yep.
Yeah, they don't know, they don't understand it, where it's like they put him in like a United States title contendership battle royal or tournament or something recently on SmackDown, and he lost, and everybody got all ticked off online. It's like, well, the original plan with the U.S. title was whatever they've been doing the last few weeks with Austin Theory and Santos Escobar and Rey Mysterio. LA Knight didn't fit into those plans.
That's
so
right.
Him getting over, like, completely threw a monkey wrench into their plans, and I'm sitting there like, okay, if you don't want to have him win the U.S. title, don't put him in the contenders match and disappoint everybody. Why does nobody understand this? Like, they don't know how to, like, look, I'm not saying the guy should be world champion or anything, but it's like, could you give him like a junkyard dog spot where he's like one of the most beloved guys on the show and he doesn't necessarily need a title, but he's a main fixture? Like, can't you come up with something for him to do not have him lose all the time?
The thing you said that's interesting, though, is that he can work. I know the promos are what the promos are, and he is very much a promo guy, much like MJF in that respect. But when the bell rings, you're not going to get a duff match. It's not like, I'm trying to think of an example. I mean, you mentioned Ultimate Warrior already, but it's not like when the bell rings, oh, well, now we got to sit through his match, even though the character's interesting. He's actually really good in the ring. So,
he is. And he's got those attributes that a lot of people online and in the Dave Meltzer school of thought don't understand what makes a good worker. And there was a match that he had in Impact. I forget who it was against, but something happened where he like slipped and fell off the rope. Now, I have seen, especially in the modern age, and we'll say modern age, post turn of the century, post Monday Night Wars period, where all these young guys that come
I think it was Johnny Impact, but the match you're talking about. But go ahead.
Possibly. That sounds about right. But, I've seen it so many times where something goes wrong or somebody slips and they get that deer in the headlight look, and they kind of like fumble around and they try to make up for the fact that they screwed up.
Yep.
And it just tips everybody off to, it's like, all right, you just screwed up. Or they get angry like Randy Orton and they start yelling at the guy for screwing up. And it's like, well, now you just told everybody that you screwed up. Like, what are you doing?
Or Shawn Michaels at SummerSlam 96 when he kicks Van, you stupid son of a bitch.
Yeah, exactly. Stuff like that. It's like, don't tell us that you screwed up. Try and work with it. And that's what Eli Drake did in this match, because he slipped and fell over and kind of sold it and created this funny spot out of it. And I looked at that and was like, if I wasn't a little bit smarter, if I was like still a kid watching this, I would have believed that that was part of the act. Like that was completely intended to be part of the show, and it wasn't like a flub or a blooper or a mistake. He took a mistake and he made it work.
Right.
And that's the type of stuff that good workers do.
Yeah, and he did it with promos too. There's a clip that circulates from NWA Power where he's like, you see this watch? Watch of a champion. You see these shoes? The shoes of a champion. You see this shirt? The shoes of a champion. And then the whole crowd starts laughing. And he's like, did I say shoes of a champion? Yeah. And there you go.
Yeah.
What?
And of course, I also pull for the guy because he's a Maryland boy. So I'm like, yeah, I'm glad to see him doing well. But I look at what he's doing right now. He really reminds me. Everybody compares him to Rock and Stone Cold, and I definitely see that there. But I see a lot of DDP in him too. Yeah.
So, well, DDP was kind of somebody who willed themselves over, so he's very much in that same role. Almost, and I know we got Cody, so you can't really say Dusty because you got Cody on the show, but very much like Dusty as well. Dusty was going to get over, goddammit. He was not going to be deterred, so.
The thing I always say about Dusty, it's like, you know how I know he was good? He took the polka dot gimmick that I don't care what anybody says. I don't care what Bruce Pritchard says, or even if Vince was asked about it, what Vince says. It was a rib. I don't care what anybody says. Nobody honestly thought that Dusty was being treated seriously when you give him the polka dot gimmick. But he got it over.
He got it over.
Dusty got it over. So the biggest middle finger of them all is that he was one of the most over guys on the show. So
there you go.
What you going to do?
All right, well, let's circle back and wrap up here. Of course, the book is why you're on here, why we got you back on the phone. Godzilla, and it's the monster fight record. Any last pitches that you wanted to make for the Godzilla fans that are also wrestling fans that might be listening?
Absolutely. One of the biggest aspects of Godzilla's everlasting appeal has been the monster battles, all the giant titanic fights between Godzilla and larger-than-life icons like Mothra, like Mechagodzilla, like King Ghidorah, like Biollante, like Destroya, like Space Godzilla. This guy's got more opponents than Mike Tyson. And to sit down and compilate and do an entire compilation of this character, this icon's win-loss record and win percentages across his entire near 70-year career was a task that I was more than happy to tackle. And I'll be honest, I think some Godzilla fans are going to debate some of my results. I think there's a lot of room for debate with some of the fights, and I think there's going to be a lot of debating and a lot of disagreements with me, which I fully encourage. I'm always up for healthy discussions and debates and all that other stuff. And I think those kind of discussions keep things alive and keep things exciting.
Other than on the Amazon product page, where can people have that debate with you?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at Patrick G Book. Find me on Twitter, and you can message me there, and I'd be more than happy to discuss the subject with you.
All right, man. Well, Patrick, I got to tell you, I told you online the other day, I'm an emotional guy. You've brought me to tears twice this year. Once I won't mention why. Then when you had a kid, that was amazing. I'm so proud of you. And I've known you for 20 years. You're one of the few people that can stand to deal with me after 20 years of knowing me. So I thank you so much for doing this and coming on. And I wish you the best of luck with the book, man.
This is Interactive Wrestling Radio.
Interactive Wrestling Radio. Interactive Wrestling Radio. Interactive Wrestling Radio. Interactive Wrestling Radio. Interactive Wrestling Radio. Interactive Wrestling Radio. Oh, rush.
Featuring the interactive interview.
Interactive interview. Interactive interview. Interactive interview. Interactive interview. Interactive interview. Interactive interview. Oh, yeah.
Formerly The Blaze.
The Blaze. The Blaze. The Blaze. The Blaze. The Blaze. The Blaze. The Blaze. The Blaze. The Blaze. The Blaze rock.
Yo, Maniacs, so what you gonna do when the Blaze of Maniacs runs wild on you?
On WrestlingEpicenter.com.
Wrestling Epicenter.
Wrestling
Epicenter. Wrestling
Epicenter.
Wrestling Epicenter.
Wrestling Epicenter. The Wrestling Epicenter. Don't get off.
And now we shamelessly name drop from our history.
The Wrestling Epicenter would like to apologize for the following.
All right, everybody. Viva la raza. Viva la raza.
Hey, y'all.
Hello, ladies.
Hey guys, we had a lovely conversation.
First lady, absolutely.
Oh, look at me. She's so kooky.
Be there. Where else?
Interactive
Wrestling Radio.
Wrestling.
Epicenter.
Oh my god, you win! Wow, being interactive.
Whoa! Let's I was not shooting. Yeah, I almost missed my pants. Breaking neck. I got 2 words for you. I've heard a lot about you guys. Let's go. Excuse my language. Getting over the shot. Plenty of no. Into the many.
No nerves.
That was great. It's going to be cool. Woo! What it's all about. The purest point of view. The living legend. Arrogant.
You're listening to me.
Instead of statement, I'm talking to you.
So lonely without you.
Yeah.
In the land of extreme.
Testify. Nevermore. Interactive interview. I'm not just the best. Interactive interview with a plastic
You
head.
earned the right.
Nobody. You better keep listening. Thank you very much. Controversy creates cash. Professional wrestling.
Made in the USA, baby.
Memphis wrestling. The guy on fire. I'm not
We were sexy.
What a show.
The one and only.
Interactive Wrestling Radio.
Wrestling Epicenter.
Interactive interview. We took care of the business. This isn't ballet. We are huge with this whole. You're where it's at. You gotta recognize who's the best. Make sure to tune in each and every week. I'll come out of your computer, knock down your door, and turn it on for you. Or else I'm gonna kick your stinking teeth in. And that's the bottom line.
Have a nice day.
It's showtime!
Don't forget to like and subscribe.